The silence after the attack was thick, as if the land itself was holding its breath. In the town of Dargo, northern Burkina Faso, a military base lay in smoldering ruin. 50 soldiers were dead, more than a number. More than a headline. It was the blood price paid in a quiet war that few outside the region understand, but beyond the base, far from the smoke and the politics, there was a small classroom in a dusty village near Dargo. The schoolteacher arrived early, as always, heating tea over charcoal, expecting a full class. Only 3 students came that day. Their faces were blank, but their eyes carried a weight no child should bear. That teacher, gray-haired, slow-spoken, stood by the doorway and whispered a prayer. Not for revenge, but for clarity. What really happened in Dargo? Who pulled the trigger and who pulled the strings? In a world where power often hides behind diplomacy and influence is bought in silence, what if this tragedy wasn't just about guns and fighters, but about who gets to decide the future of a nation? Maybe, just maybe, this pain is not punishment, but a preparation, a test, from God, of how far a people will go to reclaim the dignity they were born with. Was this an isolated attack, or a signal that something far greater is at stake? The attack on the Dargo military base was not a random act of violence. It began before dawn, with nearly 100 heavily armed militants descending on the site. The assault was swift and calculated. Vehicles were disabled, communications destroyed, and critical supplies looted or burned. When the dust settled, 50 Burkinabè soldiers had lost their lives. This was not just a loss, it was a challenge. Dargo sits in a strategic corridor, a route long exploited for smuggling weapons, gold, and fighters across Burkina Faso's northern borderlands. In recent months, President Ibrahim Traoré had fortified this corridor as part of a wider crackdown on illicit trade networks. Dargo wasn't just a checkpoint, it was a symbol of state presence, economic resistance, and territorial control. Analysts believe this wasn't just about stopping a patrol. The attackers knew exactly what to hit and when. It suggests more than brute force. It hints at insider information. Or, worse, external support. Why now? Why Dargo? The answer might lie in what the base represented, a new way forward for Burkina Faso. One that disrupted an entire shadow economy. For years, networks of illegal gold exports funneled billions out of the country. The profits didn't reach ordinary people. They propped up foreign firms, corrupt officials, and armed groups who taxed smuggling routes. Dargo was built to intercept that flow. And when a nation disrupts wealth, it invites retaliation. A school teacher near the border once said, "You don't need a gun to start a war here, just stop the trucks." The government did just that. It stopped the trucks. And now, the war has arrived at its doorstep. Traoré's reforms banning raw gold exports, building local refining capacity, ending opaque foreign military deals have begun to shift the ground under powerful interests. Those who once profited quietly now lash out violently. Not just insurgents with rifles, but those in boardrooms, embassies, and black markets who see Burkina Faso's sovereignty as a threat to their stability. But there's a deeper layer still. What if the blood spilled at Dargo was never about soldiers or strategy, but about sending a message to anyone Traoré, citizens, allies who dares to imagine a different future? And if that's true, who really ordered the hit? Was it a ragtag band of militants or the hands of something much older, much more entrenched? When the gunfire finally ceased, the ruins of the Dargo base stood as a brutal reminder of what was lost. Yet, the story that followed didn't play out as expected. There were no mass evacuations, no calls for foreign peacekeepers. Instead, something remarkable happened. The people stayed. Villagers from nearby towns walked through the smoke, helping carry bodies of fallen soldiers. Mothers cooked for the wounded. Fathers stood alongside soldiers to guard the perimeter with hunting rifles and machetes. They weren't asked. They just came. One woman said, "They died for us." So now we stand for them. The government, far from calling for external military support, doubled down on its local defense strategy. Survivors from Dargo were honored not with silence, but with a wave of enlistments. Young men and women signed up for the Volunteers for the Defense of the Homeland VDP, civilian-led groups trained to protect their own communities. One man, a peanut vendor from Kaya, signed up after the funeral of his cousin, a soldier killed in Dargo. "I never held a rifle before," he said, "but if they come again, I'll fight. Not just for my cousin, for all of us." This wasn't a government campaign. It was something deeper, a civic awakening. Dargo had become not just a battlefield, but a rallying point. In the capital Ouagadougou, candlelight vigils turned into public pledges. In classrooms, teachers rewrote lessons on national identity to include the story of Dargo. Murals appeared across town squares with slogans like, "They died standing, so we must live upright." And while social media often distorts, this time it clarified. Posts honoring the dead spread across platforms. Our sovereignty, paid in blood. Dargo is not a defeat. It is a declaration. Even songs emerged, folk singers and rappers alike turning grief into rhythm, verses into resistance. It would be easy to dismiss this as emotional overreaction, but look deeper. The people of Burkina Faso weren't just mourning the dead. They were embracing the fight. They understood something the world did. Not these attacks weren't signs of collapse. They were signs that the country was finally hitting a nerve. Sometimes, the surest sign you're doing something right is when everything starts pushing back. What if God allows pressure not to punish, but to refine? But how long can courage hold when resources run thin and enemies gather in the shadows? The death toll was publicized. The damage to the base was assessed, but the deeper cost, those measured not in numbers, but in everyday lives, are still unfolding. In a small village south of Dargo, a widow cradles her newborn child, just 3 weeks old. Her husband, a soldier, died in the assault. He never got to see his son smile. The government offered her support, a monthly stipend, education for the child, a job at the district office. But when asked what she needed most, she said, "Just tell my boy why his father didn't run." The sacrifices in Dargo are reshaping Burkina Faso's national policies, not just military, but civil. The government has expanded local defense force funding, prioritized employment for soldiers' families, and passed emergency measures for food and fuel supplies in the north. But more critically, there is now a deeper recognition. Security is not separate from daily life. You can't patrol a village that has no school, no clinic, no grain. You can't defend a border if farmers can't sell their crops. Ibrahim Traoré's administration has begun linking these realities, directing more resources into rural infrastructure, cooperative farming, and mobile health units. Dargo also triggered a political shift. Opposition voices, long skeptical of Traoré's military-first policies, have begun to shift tone, not in full agreement, but in acknowledgement that sovereignty requires collective buy-in. The people don't just want peace, they want ownership. Civic leaders, traditional chiefs, and youth groups have launched local dialogues, asking, how do we make this independence last? One elder said, "Freedom won't be won in Ouagadougou alone. It must be built in every home, every hut, every heart." But as Burkina Faso builds from within, foreign eyes are watching closely. What happens if this new model works? In international headlines, the Dargo attack was framed as further proof of Burkina Faso's instability. Commentators called it a failure of governance and questioned the country's ability to maintain security without Western military partnerships. But that's not how it feels on the ground. To many in Burkina Faso, this attack was not a symbol of collapse, but of disruption. Not of weakness, but of defiance. It was a reaction to a shift that made certain powers nervous. President Ibrahim Traoré has challenged the old rules. He's rejected foreign military bases that operated without oversight. He's cut back on development aid with political strings, and he's redirected contracts that once favored outside companies to local partners instead. Washington and Paris are watching closely. Some analysts in the West warn that Burkina Faso's pivot could open the door to authoritarian influence, but others see it differently, a country trying, finally, to be the master of its own house. And it's not alone. Mali, Niger both have walked away from traditional alliances and moved towards sovereignty-first governance. They're collaborating with Burkina Faso on new economic models, regional gold refining, joint agriculture initiatives, and cross-border security pacts. This worries the international establishment because if these new models work, the old ones become harder to justify. Foreign troops, massive aid packages, and extraction-based economies have long been sold as the only way to keep the Sahel afloat. But what if they were part of the problem? If Dargo was meant to shake Burkina Faso into submission, it's doing the opposite. It's firming its spine and raising its voice. And the world must now decide, will it listen or will it double down on the system that failed for decades? And if Burkina Faso succeeds without asking permission, what will that say about the powers who insisted it couldn't? Dargo is no longer just a place on the map. It's become a line in the sand, a mark of where things changed. Where Burkina Faso, battered and bloodied, chose not to return to the past, but to walk forward through fire. The soldiers who died are not being remembered with pity. They're being remembered with purpose. In villages and cities alike, their names are spoken as part of a larger narrative, not of tragedy, but of transformation. Families of the fallen have become pillars of a national movement. They are not just grieving, they are standing. They are reminding the nation that freedom, real freedom, never comes cheap. And in Burkina Faso, it is now being paid for in full. Traditional chiefs hold ceremonies in their honor. School children write their names in notebooks. Artists paint them as guardians of a new dawn. The country is not only mourning, it is rising. And yet, the path forward is uncertain. There will be more attacks, more doute, more foreign hands, trying to push the country back into dependency. But something fundamental has changed. The people are no longer asking for safety, they are demanding sovereignty. Perhaps this is the answer to a prayer spoken in silence across generations. A prayer not for comfort, but for courage. Perhaps, in the eyes of God, a nation that chooses dignity over convenience is already victorious no matter the cost. So what about you? When you see what Burkina Faso is fighting for its land, its children, its right to choose, do you see a fragile state? Or a rising one? The war for independence is not over. But maybe, just maybe, Dargo was the battle that finally proved it has begun.